Hey everybody! Tonight we're going to talk about rocks and gold and have a little bit of a question and answer session around rocks and gold, stemming off of last night's question and answer session, which said, hey, do you have any questions about prospecting? Well, there are quite a few on the subject of rocks and minerals, and so I thought that'd be a good segue to the next section we're going to be covering over the next few cycles, and that is rocks and gold and their relationship to each other. We've talked quite a bit about the business of how rocks and minerals are one of many indicators that you need to get and understand inside your head, so that when you're looking at your claim, you can decide whether or not the proper indicators are there for gold or not, and what that means about what you want to do in terms of your claim and its sampling and the research you want to do on site. So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about rocks and gold and how that all fits together. I'm also going to open the door to some Q&A section and let you guys pepper me with questions, and generally I'll probably go off and think about it. There were a few questions that came in earlier today that I will probably do a special post on, because I think it's a useful picture. I'll have to talk to the individual, but basically we have a gorgeous sample of some garnet schist. Okay, that's another big word we talked about before, but it's a metamorphic rock that has some relationship to gold. The schists do, and so I wanted to show you the picture he has. It's similar to this slate that I have right here, but it's a coarser grain material than this by quite a bit, and it has embedded in it some really gorgeous crystals, gemstone quality garnets, big ones. So I thought that would be a fun one to talk about later, but for right now, let's talk about what you want to talk about. Let me make sure you're on. So I've got Justin and Joe Kerrigan. Hey, loud and clear, he says. Steve Ford from Australia. Bob from Ohio. I'm going to turn this down. I don't need to hear myself hearing myself. And we got Joe, and we got Josh, and we got Justin again, loud and clear. And Steve says, can you do a show on how to make things about tools and so forth? That's a whole nother tangent, and it's in the mix. I got your request, along with several others who've requested similar things. One of the things that I've always wanted to do, and you can pepper me below about what you think about it and what tools you'd want to know about it for, I would like to do the missing manual. Yeah, a lot of times the equipment comes and you got it there and it's great. If you just knew how to put it together, that's probably the lesser problem. More importantly is how to set it up so that it works right, because it turns out a lot of these things have major adjustments and some minor ones. And if you don't know quite what you're doing, you can really mess up your flow. You can lose all your gold out the back end in a hurry. And that's not why you bought the equipment. And that goes from metal detectors to sluice boxes and dredges and high bankers and gold pans. Every one of them has a right and a wrong way, and then there's a range of gray in between. And that's the fun part, because it depends. And so I'd like to do one on tools, and not so much the tools as it is what we call gold recovery process. How you find gold is one thing. That's what we've covered a lot about in prospecting. How you recover gold is a whole nother beast, and oftentimes they intertwine, like with a gold pan, and sometimes they intertwine with bigger beasts, like D8 caterpillars and that kind of stuff. And so you want to know kind of what it is you want to adjust the equipment to do. What are you trying to accomplish with this, and how to best do it in such a way that you get the most efficient recovery. And that that goes for the whole spectrum of use. So that's a great topic, tools and their relationship and how you use them. So let me know whether the idea of a missing manual, the answer to the missing manual is would be a good topic to cover. Just comment below and say, yeah, I'd like to see that. And a chapter I'd like to know about is how to set up a long tom, or maybe I will do a dry washer or something. Some topic like that. But just kind of you come up with the ideas. I'm just seeding it with those two. I don't want to limit it, but I do want to know what really bugs you about prospecting recovery equipment for gold or platinum or silver or anything like that. Gemstones too. That's fair game. So with that, said, I thought I'd dive into our thing. Let's check to make sure we're not getting off track here. I've never panned for gold. Want to start this summer? Well, go for it, Joe. It's time to learn. And beginner tools, I did a thing on beginner tools about a month ago. So look here on Hunting for Gold or on Prospector Jess channel, the Hunting for Gold page on Facebook or Prospector Jess channel, and search for my favorite gold tools or something like that, or my favorite prospecting tools. And there's a thing about, you know, gold pans, and I kind of pull them up. You know, I have it's over there. But, you know, I had some various instruments out that I showed you, and I wanted to kind of, you know, give you some introductory to, you know, I've still got a few of them lying around here. Like, you know, electronic equipment and pickaxe, that goes together real well. Sometimes I feel like that, but that's another story. So for now, you know, this is a well-used tool. You can tell. This one, unfortunately, doesn't follow my rule where I color the bands on there, and I talk about that in that thing. I use a colors code scheme to identify my tools and find them on the bottom when I'm dredging. So it's important to be able to do those things. Hey, Wayne, Nugget Brain, good, got him here. Wayne Peterson, he chimed in a while back and gave some good topics for us to cover. And so I've never panned. Let's see, sounds good. I'd like to have a Miller table. That's a good one. And Blue Bowl. Those are all for fine gold recovery and for finishing your black sands and concentrates. Yeah, and if somebody's in Colorado, go ahead and contact Wayne. He'd be glad to help set you up with some prospecting training and introduce you to some people who really know how. He's got equipment. He's over in the Durango $1 Million Mile area. Great prospecting and gorgeous country. Oh man, awesome stuff. So talk to him. Bob Lanier, using my Desert Fox gold wheel, I get more black sand than gold. Okay, so see, we've got these things where we have different tools. I didn't want to go into that tonight. I just want you to start seeding this, and we'll bring it back up. We've also got the other topic we brought up a while back was some other kinds of training, including on-site. And so just trying to get the idea out there and keep it alive. It'll take a while to kind of distill what we're going to do. The one we're going to do taking off starting right away is rocks. And what do rocks have to do? You saw this one last night, and you saw this one last night. And they're both quartz, believe it or not. The difference is what was embedded in the quartz. And specifically, they both have stuff that intrigued me in the sense that they had iron available. You can kind of see it in this one on that edge. You see how kind of dark gray, and well, not dark gray, but brownish yellow. And also you notice there's kind of a golden sheen to it. That starts getting your attention real fast. This one, on the other hand, looks real interesting. Pass a detector over it and it kind of squawks, you know, kind of weirdly. But it is, for the most part, leverite, because it has a lot of iron and probably pyrites that have corroded out of this and left lots of vugs, they call them, little holes in the pockmarks. And so, you know, basically it's let go of a lot of the metallic content in the form of oxides, but it does not have gold, not any appreciable amount. Now, when you see something like this, you're looking for this kind of corrosive look, especially if it's in the side. Then you start looking for little bands of gold in there or something that'll set off your detector in a very, you know, a very loud ring. A similar kind of material is this chalcopyrite that you've seen me hold up so many times. This stuff is chock full of gold, but it's in composition with the copper ore that's in there. So it's copper iron sulfide is the formation. This guy is dense. He weighs a lot, and that's because he has a fair portion of gold buried in with the copper. And so that can vary, as can electrum in something like this guy. There could have been some nice bands of silvery, brassy looking stuff. You might have thrown it away thinking that's leverite, for leverite there, but it's not always, because silver and gold go together, and especially in a lot of the areas along the Sierra Nevada and some of the stuff out, even up in Alaska, you'll see a fair amount of what's called electrum, which is largely silver with a little bit of gold, enough gold to be well worth recovering. Not necessarily worth, unless it has a very crystalline structure, worth a lot more values than, you know, than just some silver plus gold. In other words, the spot prices for each of those less 20% or so for the refining costs. The problem is, what you're really looking for is more concentrated gold. So you're looking for something that, you know, that looks more yellow and has that yellow brass, not brass, it's more yellow than brass look to it. Can't quite get this thing to focus. There we go. And so what you're looking for is that appearance of the gold when it is in the rock, and that can vary from silvery to green to red if it has copper, or greenish red if it has copper or silver in there. And so what ends up happening, if you've ever seen Black Hills gold, you can get a wide range of different colors, you know, purpley, reddish, greenish, and gold, and even a silvery kind of a rose colored kind of thing. So there's all kinds of variations by mixing the different materials, essentially copper, gold, and silver, and any other alloys that go in there. So it's kind of important to know that gold isn't always gold in color. In fact, most oftentimes it's not. When you find gold nuggets or gold that is truly really deep gold, you'll find oftentimes it's actually in nugget form, or it's in material that's been in the creek bed exposed to more acidic waters and has had a chance to react, which causes the silver to form a silver nitrate coating, which essentially burnishes off because it's kind of a, you know, more soluble material and more chemically attacked, silver is, than gold. And so what ends up happening is the gold left behind continues to get more and more and more concentrated over time, and turns into something that can be quite close to pure gold in some cases. And that is the fingerprint of the creek and the gold lode that fed it. And that's a very interesting aspect of gold prospecting, and that is if you actually look at the atomic ratios, if you looked at the spectrum of this stuff, you'd find you'd actually be able to characterize different creeks and different materials from different lodes along the Sierra Nevada, for example, or up in Alaska, or in Australia. And they look very different on their spectral thing, and sometimes visually. If you'll notice, a lot of Australian gold, especially this stuff found out in the desert, will tend to be burnished, kind of a reddish, ruddy looking color. It's very dark and full of what they call gangue. It has a lot of quartz crystals that are just heavily stained, similar to this thing. And so what ends up happening is it looks far deeper red and kind of grunge look. And then I've had people comment recently on that one that we posted that was found from Australia that was almost 24 plus, well, not 24, 23 plus carat gold, 2.5 kilogram nugget. And that thing was extremely pure and extremely gold color, and people denied, you know, they basically started speculating, well, it's fake because it's too gold. No. Gold is really, really gold when you get it that pure. It's just, most places it's not that pure, so it doesn't look like that. But if you go along the Sierra Nevada, for example, along the Mother Lode on up to areas along Grass Valley, you'll find some gold that looks very similar to that, and it's just unbelievable. It just jumps out at you, because most folks are used to seeing gold look like brass. You know, this stuff looks just, you know, deep, rich. This is some of it. It has that deep, rich yellow color to it. I'm not sure it comes through on the camera at all, but you can kind of see it against my blue shirt. It's not brassy at all. And so what happens is that variation defines kind of the fingerprint of what you're looking for. So that's one aspect of rocks and gold and their connection together, the alloys that they make. So let's look at some other rocks that are kind of interest. I've talked a lot about various greenstones and so forth. This is a piece of serpentinite. You can tell it because of the kind of sheen it has. It had kind of a waxy coating. Let's see if I can make it do its thing on the between the camera and the light source. See how it kind of, not sparkles, but kind of looks like little waxy edges here. You can't quite make it out. If I could, you know, kind of shoot a light across from that side, you'd see that it's reflecting. But this thing feels greasy, and part of why it feels greasy is that it actually has buried in it. I don't know whether I just dropped out. My video seems to have died on me for some reason. So, but part of why it feels greasy is this appearance of material. Pardon me, folks. We're having a little technical difficulty. Let me get back to the Q&A section. So part of why it feels greasy here is it has actually little microfibers of asbestos along the edges. This material is a mafic, so it's iron and magnesium. and that also hydrates into this kind of crystal material and other stuff, including jade. Can be one of the artifacts of this material. Now, why do I bring this up? Because this stuff is found in the region of this stuff in fairly high proximity. And so typically what you'll find is this thing will tend to get chock full of this junk, because that's actually where this came from. And sometimes it'll be chock full of another, slice of that will have, gold ores like this chalcopyrite, which is also in the vicinity of this. And that's kind of what you're starting to look for, is the connection between those different rock species. The other thing that goes along in areas like that is there tends to be a lot of orogenic activity and uplifting, and that will produce things like these pieces of slate. And why are they of interest? Well, they also can contain gold, as well as, because of their linear fractures, you see how these things are like plates? These make great fractures, and if the river comes along perpendicular to them, or even parallel to them, if it's shaped right in a V shape, it can trap the gold going downstream and start to concentrate inside these cracks. Great thing to look for if you're sniping for gold. Just dig down in the cracks with your crevicing tool. So that's another piece of interest. Another mineral that I bring up quite often is a piece of magnetite here, because these are also magnesium ferric. This is ferric material, very dense, so it goes to the bottom very near where gold's going to be. If you find this stuff, or if you find old rusty pieces of auto body parts after a rainstorm like we've had this year, where the auto bodies have had a chance to turn around and move to the bottom before they rust out, those parts will settle in the vicinity of this kind of magnetite stuff, which will settle in the vicinity of gold. And so again, these rocks are telling you a story. What you need to learn to do is identify the rocks. Identify what they look like, how dense they feel, what their streak looks like when you streak them on a streak plate, and so forth. I have a product on that called Rocks and Gold, and anyway, that's another story. But gold, rocks, and minerals. And so that's the kind of thing you're looking for, is how to identify them, how to make sure you understand what they go with, and where they're going, and what they tell you about gold. Here's another piece of quartz that has very interesting, see that dark stained rusty look? It kind of goes through a band right through the center of this thing. Makes it look ugly. When you see quartz that looks like this, kind of not interesting. When it starts to look like this, where it's got that black stripe, almost black brown running through it, that's what you're looking for. And when you see it, you'll know it. Especially if it's fairly large size, you're going to start looking all around that area for other evidence of gold, and also for lode or placer gold in the nearby vicinity, downhill, downstream. And so that's kind of it for tonight. I just wanted to touch bases on that. How should you sample riverbanks? As I've said before, one of the key things on riverbank is you want to kind of know where look for outcroppings of the bedrock. Try to go to bedrock if you can. If you can't, you're looking for large cobbles. Just don't have my large cobble here right now. That's funny. I usually trip over it. Why do I have this stuff around anyway? I mean, what is with that, Jess? I don't know. I guess I like rocks. But anyway, it's not uncommon to find large cobbles in these areas. What you're looking for would be gold traps and places where there might be a significant amount of material trapped, and especially if there's a layer of concreted material below it, muds and so forth that have concreted. The beauty of that is, people, will get this information, get the material below that, and they won't go to bedrock, and they'll wonder why they're only getting black sands, or they're only getting certain materials, and that's because the gold settled below that stuff. The big boulders, they were moving when the gold was dropping to bedrock. And so once the stuff settles and everything locks up, what you have on top is the last things that moved. Well, that's not the gold. The last thing that moved is just that. It's the last thing that moved. The gold itself is going to settle further down toward bedrock, unless something come along. Somebody mentioned it the other night, a landslide. Boom, and that would change that whole thing for a while. But even they pointed out in that flood that knocked that thing down and caused a landslide, it also took out all the material that was in the river and spread it downstream. Well, that's a classic example for look right after the landslide went in, but go to bedrock. You still got to go down there, because when that stuff's moving that heavily, it's going to sift everything down, and the gold will just pop down through it. And it follows, you know, kind of a parabolic trajectory, like a ballistic, you know, cannon shot to the bottom, and that's what it's going to do. Joe, can you start out with a gold pan kit, gold pan, snuffer bottle, digging shovel, 5-gallon bucket? Okay, so somebody's made a recommendation Wayne has about what things to get, and I like his kit. Good idea. So keep it simple and keep it light. The one thing I would recommend you do that's going to cost you a little bit more than typical, it's well worth it to get yourself a rock pick. Don't have to get the best in the world, although I like Estwing because they're durable and I tend to break them. So I'm abusive. But that's the thing about it. And Estwings don't break. They tend to grind off the tips, and you have to sharpen them again. But that's the worst I've done, except one big handled one. I bent it, but that's another story. That was a different rock. Let's see, wash stones. Yes, you want to wash stones. When you wash stones that are in those conditions where they're covered with mud and clay that might stick to gold, make sure you wash them and scrub them carefully into your pan before you pan it out. Don't wash them in the creek, or that can release gold into the creek. The mud and clay can stick to gold, and the gold will be released only when you break it apart. That gets into a whole nother part of chemistry having to do with van der Waals forces, which are a fancy word for electrostatic charge in a sort of fluid material. The clay material that makes clay is little tiny sheets similar to, you know, this is like a giant version of it, but they're little tiny sheets of material that have charges on each side, and they stick together even when they're wet because of those electric charges. And what happens is you have to kind of physically break that. You can break it through either physical disruption, or you can introduce other chemicals like jet dry, you know, some kind of a water, what do they call it? Anyway, surface tension breaking material. Okay, so like soap. Okay, and what's going to happen is that disrupts that electronic bond, and this thing can come apart. When it's together, you can end up with two pieces like this, and I'll pretend this is a piece of gold. It can be trapped in between those little sheets, a little tiny flake of gold, or even sometimes even a nugget, because this stuff will actually bond around it. And unless a river with enough agitation comes along, a flood, to actually disrupt these two pieces, break the clay up and make it go into solution, this piece of gold won't be released. On the converse, if you have a piece of gold and it's in your sluice box, and a body of this stuff rolls over it, it can trap it and carry it right on out because it changed the specific gravity of the whole object. That's another little tip from PJ. Don't let the clay roll through your sluice box. Break it up, because it can just be acting like a sponge and mopping up all your gold and sending it out the back end. So that's kind of that. Joe, let's see. Sorry guys to get you guys. Have a good night. Have a good night, Justin. Take care, and happy Easter tomorrow. We wash then here all the time. Clay drives me nuts. Yes, clay can drive you nuts, but clay is a gold trap. So if you have a lot of clay, it can oftentimes pay to do something really weird. Put it in a cement mixer and mix it up with water. Get it all into a slurry, and then run that through your sluice or pan it out, and then get the concentrates that come out of that. Break it up carefully, though. Make sure it's all completely broken up. No balls of clay. Balls of clay are bad trouble. Let's see. Jet dry, only need about 3 drops. Yep, or even 1. Just a tiny amount. Just enough to break up the surface tension. See, now I remember what it's called. Okay, so I think that's it for tonight. I just wanted to touch on these rocks again, and we'll do more. I've got a whole box of rocks here. You know, new egg. Rocks and electronics. But yeah, I got rocks coming out the. How about that one? That's a nice piece of agate. But you know, it's one of those things where they connect together, and knowing how they connect can help you see where gold is. Also help you to recover gold depending upon the different kinds of rocks and structures that the gold is being found in. And that's why we're here. We're here to help you find more gold. Again, like I said before, look at the government gold maps below. That gives you a start if you're interested. There's a presentation there about what I teach about gold maps and how to get started looking for places near you. I've been doing that whole series over the last few months. So you can go look them up for your state, see if it's in there. That's just the beginning. A lot of people want to know just exactly what's in my neighborhood, and the answer is I don't have enough time to cover all of those. This is relatively cheap, and it will go into giving you the skill to go look for what I was looking for and map it yourself and build just the size map and the orientation you want to, and color it the way you like. So that's what that's all about. I just want to touch on that for a moment. And again, rocks and gold. Oh, and another point here, this is an area where it's made of these greenstones, serpentinite, largely. Downstream, you can see in this area down in here, I'm drawing the upper half. You notice how it changes texture drastically and seems to look a little kind of, it has little cross fractures as opposed to this nice big blocky fracture in the foreground. That's starting to shift toward slates. And so what happens is, notice the direction the water flow is going. It's kind of going diagonally across the stream and then around the corner there. You can see my hat across the way there in the bushes. And so what happens is, as this thing flows through here, it's a jet across that, but that backside's all slate. Sounds like a gold trap to me. And so it's great for looking for, you know, all kinds of interesting crevicing and that kind of stuff. Up front here, it's largely greenstones, and notice how polished it is. You're not going to find a whole lot of gold there unless you go down in the cracks and fracture the stuff out. And even then, because of how it's polished and how much age it's got, it's pretty much jetted all the gold downstream from here. And so that's where you'd go look. You might look just a little ways downstream, like that pool in the front might be interesting, but chances are pretty good if it's scoured out and as smooth as this is, it's not going to carry much. And that's just kind of what rocks do. The other thing I wanted to show you, let's see if I got this here. Oh, no. You know, in the desert, you have the same kind of properties. You know, the rocks tell their story. They get carved out. They're oftentimes consisting of other material that's a little older and sometimes sedimentary, sometimes igneous, but ancient igneous. And so what you're going to be looking for is the same kind of pattern, but the materials tend to look differently. A lot more oxidation going on here because of the nature of the environment. A lot less ripping through with water every year, so it's not as I wouldn't say not as polished. It's not the same kind of coloring mostly. The oxides tend to form and bake on with calcite, and so you get these funny layers of white and orange and red. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have gold. Quite the contrary. It can concentrate some pretty serious gold and be a great place for metal detecting. So I just thought I'd touch on that for a moment. And for that, I think we'll go back and kind of call it a night. Steve Ford says he's used a paint mixer full of clay and in the field sometimes. Yep, and get a little DC drill. You know, get your Milwaukee out there and stir it up like you're stirring paint, and just make sure it's all like glop. It's actually like pancake mix. And then once you have it to the consistency of pancake mix, start dripping it into your sluice box and let it do the settling the way it's supposed to. And the idea is you don't run anything through that sluice that hasn't been mixed up carefully. That's a tip for tonight. That's a great one. And thanks for bringing that up, Steve. That's a good point. You don't necessarily have to have a cement mixer in the field. You know, if you do, you know, you can do big concentrates, but, you know, heck, anything that stirs it up. So shout out to the diligent prospectors. Loads happen. Yes, they do, Lewis. So Bob Sheasley says thanks. Thanks. Good night, everybody. Good prospecting. Over and out, and have a happy Easter. He is risen.